And then on the participant list, you can go to the More by Alexandra's name, and you should be able to make her a co-host.
There we go.
Yay! Sorry everyone for all the Zoom issues on a day. Very rare that neither Gina or I could be here, but thank you all so much. We appreciate you, and I will see you all next week on the Clean Call, and look forward to watching the recording of this one.
All right, thank you so much. All right, so have all the folks here done their introductions? All right, so I will do a brief introduction and then let her explain a little bit more. This is Dr. Panos from USF. She studies climate literacy from a like media and storytelling perspective. Is doing some really cool work with English language arts teachers around climate. Lives in the Tampa area, and honestly, you can probably explain it better than I can. So I'm really excited to hear you talk about your current projects.
Thanks, Carolyn. Thank you all for the chance to talk with the group. I've wanted to make this call, but I often teach at this time, and so can never make it. And planned very far in advance to be here so that I could be here. But I'm hoping that in the future my schedule changes and I can actually join and be a contributing member in many ways rather than just this one. And thank you, Carolyn, for the invitation and sharing my name with the group. So I'll get started. I have some slides. I just want to share that they're slides. I don't have stopping points for like commentary or questions or dialogue, but I would welcome any interruptions by throwing your mic off or raising a hand or comments in the chat. I teach often, so I'm very used to this space and it's not going to mess me up or make me feel uncomfortable, I promise. So let's go ahead and get started here. Okay. So I'm just going to arrange all my stuff so that I can see people and the chat and all of the things like we have to do now for those of us who teach a lot. Okay, so like Carolyn and Katie mentioned, my name is Alex Panos, and I'm an assistant professor at the University of South Florida, the Tampa campus, but I live in St. Petersburg. And I am a assistant professor of literacy studies and qualitative methodologies. And so I come to this work very much not as a science educator. I leave that to the experts, certainly, and I'm very interested in how to bring all the fruits to bear to support a broad range of teaching practices in K-12 schools and beyond, to support teachers in that work, and to just make more education for the climate possible in the many ways it can be possible. Okay, no, thank you. Okay, here we go. So just to start with, I'd like to acknowledge and honor the Indigenous communities who live and lived and took stewardship of the land where I do my work and where I'm sitting right now. The work that I've done has taken place on stolen land, which was home to the Tocobaga, Seminole, and Calusa people, as well as their ancestors going back over 10,000 years. And today, our state of Florida, which is now known as Florida, is home to the Seminole, Miccosukee, Muskegee, and Choctaw, as well as to individuals of many other Native groups. And I share this acknowledgement because the violent erasure of their cultures under settler colonialism was enforced in institutions like the one that I work for, and specifically through educational disciplines like literacy. And that's part of how I think about my work. So, oh my goodness, why does it not like that? Okay, hello, this is me. You can also see me here. I am a former English language arts middle grades teacher. I also taught media in Chicago. And so like my background is in urban education. I did my PhD at Indiana University in literacy, language, and culture studies. where I worked in rural schools, and I myself am a product of suburban schools. So I think about K-12 schooling across place. I'm also a New Floridian, been here the last few years. Yes, I agree, Carrie. Middle school is the best. It takes a special brand of person. Yay, Leia. Okay, awesome. Love it. But so yeah, that says a lot about who I am as a person and how I think about disciplines, that we should all be teaching together, that we need to be doing transdisciplinary work, that it should be inquiry driven. And that's just part of where I come from. I also am a human that has done work in South America, which is why you see this capybara. I did work with youth groups and libraries and environmentalism. So I started that a while ago. I also have a very cute dog named Arrow and like to hike and camp and all of that good stuff. But in terms of my scholarship, I've been thinking about the intersections of climate change and literacy since about 2014. My mentor, James D'Amico, came and gave a talk to you all a while ago on climate denial. And he and I started our work together over, I guess, 10 years ago now, thinking about reliability and reading online and media literacy. So that's where we started. And then we really started disrupting some of what we meant by critical literacies and their intersection with reading about something as complex as climate change, and realized that we were missing the social justice component of climate change. And so we started more explicitly integrating concerns around social justice. And I also became more and more interested in how story and the texts we use beyond just media-based texts can support more broad integration of climate and eco-justice issues into literacy and ELA education. Most recently, I am really honored to serve as the Director of Research for the Center for Climate Literacy, which is at the University of Minnesota. Their sort of resource arm is called Climate Lit, and all the folks there are very interested in the idea of literacy, which is not like environmental literacy or climate literacy, but literacy and the work that goes into that with text and story and rhetoric and writing and all of those good things, and how that is really essential to a full climate education. And so that work is growing and is pretty cool. We have a new practitioner journal that I'll talk about at the end of everything. So, oh my goodness gracious, you are being a punk today, Google. So again, my work starts from this premise that literacy teaching for the climate is necessary and important. Our main professional organization, or one of the main professional organizations, is the National Council for Teachers of English. And in 2019, we released a resolution on the imperative of literacy to use all of the tools of language and communication and our literacy research to address climate change. However, it is not quick going. James and I published some work that looked across all of the main places that literacy researchers and teachers publish their work and share their work, and found that less than 1% even addressed any climate issue or any environmental issue. It wasn't even trying to say it has to be climate change with this, anthropogenic global warming, like none of that. We took a very broad view because we knew it just wasn't really present. And so from my perspective, this is really concerning for a number of reasons. And the one that I think is most pressing is that all of our disciplines create the norms that trickle down into schools to a certain extent, not always perfectly. But if we're not doing research about how to effectively integrate climate and socio-ecological issues into our research and into the teaching and learning in schools and after school environments, it's not going to happen. And from my perspective, the silence is a way of promulgating denial. So if we're not part of the work, we are actively making it not possible, and we're not creating more opportunities for children to think about their lives in relation to the world around them as it exists now and as it will exist in the future. So with that, right now, where I am is really building from eco-justice education and Martuskowicz's work about this idea that, we need to challenge dominant assumptions that harm our ecosystems and life on this planet, in order to restore the cultural and environmental commons. And from this, a climate justice and eco-justice literacies, again, coming from my world, not science education, is to invite inquiry into the stories that circulate as part of our transdisciplinary communications, the ways that motivated text and media systems and readers ourselves play an important role in those stories and the material impacts on the world around us, and interrogating the unjust systems in order to envision something better. So this is not new, but it is newer to my field. And perhaps of greatest importance, and why I have the word Florida in my title for today, is that we know, and I know you all know, that place-based education and place-based understandings are really essential to movement on people getting what's happening and making that possible. So if we have a field that's already not really grounded in this work, and we need to help them get there, the idea of story is about a global scale, but also about placemaking. And from my perspective, the idea that we do place, like as we learn about place, we're doing it. And so how can we continue to support children and teachers in doing place in ways that align with that, that idea of eco-justice? And this, just to be clear, are some pictures of Hurricane Ian from fall of 2022. It's just a pretty powerful image from my perspective about how Florida is under a lot of pressure environmentally, climate-wise, and politically. One of the teachers that I work really closely with, and she's just a brilliant human, she said in a workshop we had, how do you teach literacy and stories and empathy and all these things if you can't even get kids access, and she means to text and complex topics. I'm just trying to survive right now. I don't know what to do. And so this is the sort of context that I find myself in, thinking about literacy teachers in particular, although all teachers certainly, but literacy teachers in particular have been under a great deal of pressure. And the idea of integrating another hot topic into their work is just a lot. It just is. I don't know how else to say it. And I have empathy for that. Scott, lots of questions re how to get Florida teachers on board with this, especially. Yes, that's, can you outline the challenges for language teachers in Florida? Yes. Okay. So that's part of what I want to talk about today. So to start with, some of the challenges include the myriad legislation that is restricting access to books in classrooms, and in particular, books that represent the children in our classrooms. So teachers are navigating the idea, or the reality, that should they violate some of these laws, which are in the middle of changing right now, I will say, so this is a little bit old, but in this is not from that long ago, it's from last fall, teachers would be subject to felony and loss of licensure if they bring the wrong curriculum into their classroom. That creates a culture of fear. That means that teachers are afraid to bring anything into their classroom. And so that is a huge challenge. Teachers are, oh my goodness, leaving the field. This is an email I got from the most brilliant pre-service teacher who now is not going to stay in the field because she just can't do it. Leah, yeah, that's exactly what's happening over and over again. And I'm aware that everyone is really, I don't know, aware yourselves about this. It's in the news, we all know about it, but the reality for teachers is a culture of fear that stifles innovation, and it stifles a desire to take risks, and reasonably so, frankly. I think it's reasonable to worry about your livelihood. So how I've responded to this, and I'm going to shift away, Scott, from your question for a minute, but I'm going to come back to it, is that we live by stories in the world around us, and this is very reasonable to literacy and English language arts teachers. People who teach literacy and English language arts, this resonates with the idea that there are narratives around us, that we read them, that we write them, and we need to disrupt them, right? Like that's part of the work. We need to identify what they are, examine them, and see other ways of knowing, being, and doing. And this is part of sort of linguistic and media-based literacies that are aligned with a lot of science communication stuff too. So I know that stories are not new for you all. But introducing this idea to teachers has been pretty effective. You can say to them, hey, these kinds of stories, all of the kinds of texts you might bring to children in your classroom can be read through an eco lens of whether something is destructive, whether it's kind of ambiguous, it's both destructive and beneficial, or it's beneficial. This is the kind of story we want to strive for. When I talk to my pre-service teachers or in-service teachers when I'm teaching class and teaching about selecting text, they often go, no, you have to have a reliable story. You have to have a reliable piece of media to talk about. James and my work, the first thing we published was about how we need to rub up reliable stories against unreliable stories. That's part of what we said. But taking it a step further, into the more humanities-driven, story-driven world, we need to give children a chance to say, oh, I see how this is destructive, and this is what I want to be searching for. And all of those kinds of texts and ways of knowing can be part of our classroom. They're also connected to sort of eco-justice aims that help people identify destructive stories like the prosperity story, or more beneficial stories like all species, people, and culture have intrinsic worth, which is something that we want to be teaching the students in our classrooms. James and I and our colleague Mark Bilden, and then he and Mark Bilden wrote a book that was more focused on social studies and was the topic of his talk, have talked about how confronting denial is complicated and requires critical literacies. It requires civic practices. You have to examine context and denial texts themselves. And you need to be paying attention to the circulating stories we live by and the ecosophies that are part of that. And ecosophy is just this idea that our ecological selves and our philosophies about the world can be combined and articulated in a way that help us do things. Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson's and Elizabeth Wilkerson's All We Can Save project has a great little Venn diagram that also talks about this, right? So many of you have maybe seen that. The idea that like, okay, what am I good at? What do I know about the world? And how am I going to do it? That's another way to think about ecosophy. From my perspective and how I think about this and confronting denial, both in my field, and I don't mean that as like an intentional denial. I do not think that literacy researchers are out there actively denying climate change. I just mean the field's norms, as well as the denial present in our state and the politics of our state, and then the way that fear feeds denial practice. I have come to pay attention to helping teachers think about the context they're in, think about the stories that we're currently living by, think about the critical literacies they need to address those issues, building their own ecosophy that allows them to navigate that successfully and carefully and safely in order to get to those stories we live by. So I don't take all of this, but this is kind of how I think about it. And given that you had all already heard from James, I thought this might be a helpful way to enter the conversation a little bit. As my final, I swear, sort of framing idea, ultimately where I'm coming from is that to do eco-justice literacies work with teachers and to support them in doing this kind of work, they need to do it. That's a national writing project idea. I'm sure there are other professional organizations that take a similar one, but the idea is that for teachers to do something, they need to have lived it. So in my work with teachers and children, I really think about encouraging collaborative inquiry through socio-ecological and transdisciplinary topics. I think about how to scaffold and support critical entanglements with the media ecosystems and the motivated text and personal ecosophies that they're navigating. The importance of placing that sense-making in community contexts while also connecting to larger and global systems and structures in order to promote beneficial narratives and counter stories that advocate for justice. So this is the framework that I have come to over this time that I've been working. And what I thought I would do today is talk about some of the research projects that I've started that I'm trying to work through to sort of answer your questions, Scott. And it's not perfect. I don't have good answers yet. I mean, I'm working on them, you know, because there's not one perfect answer for every teacher out there. But so the current projects that I'm working on include a survey of ELA teachers in Florida, an openly accessible resource portal, ongoing teacher workshops and working groups. And I'm also trying to be a teacher of kids again. So working on placemaking activities with kids that are focused on eco-justice literacies, because it's been a while since I worked with kids. So with that, the first project that I just want to touch on, and again, I'll just touch on these, I'm not digging in too deeply here, is a survey of ELA teachers in Florida. And to start with this, we designed this survey from scratch using some great resources such as the Yale Climate Change Communication Survey. We actually embedded the SASE, which is a 6-question survey, into our survey. There's a wonderful piece by Mark Kissling and Jonathan Bell, who conducted a survey of social science teachers in Pennsylvania. And I think they'd be a great additional invite for your group. And then NPR and Ipsos put a survey out in 2019 about climate teaching. And we used those along with some understandings from the Florida Climate Resilience Survey and the political nature of climate change to draft a survey. It just went out last month, so this is not finished data. I haven't done the data analysis yet, but we already have almost 500 respondents, mostly from public schools, and 92% believe that we should be teaching climate change in the ELA classroom. I was shocked and just really pleased to hear that. It means that the will is there, or at least the understanding of it needing to be taught is there, which I didn't know before. And 48% said they don't have the materials to teach it in ELA and that they don't know enough, which is well established in other climate surveys of teachers. So that's not surprising, really. But qualitatively, some of the things they said, many reported concerns about parents and state response to integrating. So that just remains a really important part of this. The other thing that I can already say really concretely is that Florida ELA teachers are not only think that we need to teach this, but they're also very alarmed and at a much higher rate than the rest of the country. 50 to 33% are more alarmed. And again, that's not surprising in some ways, in other ways it is. But from my perspective, what this study is doing, and we're doing a follow-up interview study as well, but that hasn't even begun yet, so didn't need to talk about that. But what we're trying to understand here is what they care about, what their challenges are, what topics they feel like they already know about. There's a section in the survey that deals with regional issues that are specific to Florida or the Southeast. And ultimately, I'm hoping that a survey like this can be sent out across the country to each state, and that the regional parts can be adjusted, and that ELA teachers and researchers who want to be doing this work can learn a lot about the nuances of their state and the ELA teachers' viewpoints, as well as the challenges that they already are experiencing, whether that's either in beliefs about climate change or understanding of regional topics or concerns about the political nature of the topic. So this survey is this project is saying, okay, what's out there? What do we know? Because we really don't know. There aren't the kinds of surveys of science teachers that there are. You guys have so many in science education, and we just don't. The second project that I'm working on is also sort of providing resources. It was responding, this came out first, but in some ways it's responsive to the teacher's need for more resources. And this is an openly accessible resource portal called the Eco Literacies for Climate Action in Florida, LCAF. It's part of the Florida Environmental and Natural History portal that the USF Libraries has compiled, which is a really impressive space. They have lots of amazing archives that are digitally available. And my colleague Amanda Bozar has helped me with this. But the purpose of this is to create access to stories, access to the kinds of books that could be taught in Florida classrooms, possibly, that it's a collaborative transdisciplinary space, and that it's working on place-based materials that are specific to the teachers and their students. That it also includes archives and media and connects to that larger FLEN portal. What does it look like? Oh, okay, good, I did the right thing. I'll take you to the space, but basically we're trying to connect different texts, whether that's a children's, a YA book, or a documentary, to children's experiences of, or give them more information about the place they are. So we're using ArcGIS, and it's the story maps feature that we're using right now. to integrate archives as well as access to other resources, but they're all organized by the story, by whichever story we're doing. So right now, these are the ones that we're featuring. So this one is about Flush by Carl Hyacin. You may have heard of his book Hoot, which is more popular, but I like Flush. And it's really about water pollution. And so we're talking about water access and what happens there. It's also about habitats, tourism, which is a major impact on our systems here in Florida, with multiple maps that children can navigate individually, independently, or as a group that the teacher could walk people through. So these are the archival resources. There are additional resources. And then we have also included story locations from Flush so that children can see it, because just because it's Florida doesn't mean that they've been to the Keys. I can promise you that many of us in Florida have not been to the Keys. Another one that we have done here, and just to highlight it quickly, is a documentary that was created about the USF campus when a preserve that is a very culturally significant area and environmentally significant area was going to be developed. A group of activists created this documentary around their activism campaign, and we've included that along with some background on our own experiences here at USF and the documents about our land development and how that connects to other places across the state, along with resources about the indigenous communities that were fighting for non-development. And it didn't get developed, so that's exciting. Other resources have to do with environmental racism. This book is just fantastic and talks a lot about access to public space, et cetera, et cetera. So this is one of those resources that I'm trying to develop to meet teachers where they are and give them more tools. The third project that I've been working on is working with teachers and understanding what they're going through and helping them create networks and opportunities to think through issues. So I'll just say from the start that your area writing projects are amazing resources for workshops and ongoing communities of teachers. So I started with mine and then created a series of workshops in the fall 2022 with support from USF, where we did place-based walking at the preserve on our campus. We did creative multimodal composing, and they took time to articulate an ecosophy themselves. So they were trying out the things that they might do with children. And then I took that as a pilot project and applied for the Spencer Education Foundation and received a research grant from them. And I'm growing this work right now. It's going to start in June, so it's in the process. But we'll be doing recruiting across the state to create a network of teachers where they'll get monthly mailers with resources, as well as place-based information about socioecological and climate concerns relative to where they are, because that's one of the things we've learned is teachers just don't know what the concerns are where they are. They might know what they care about, like I'm sick of the houses getting built in suburban Manatee County, but they might not also know larger environmental justice issues. Then we'll meet virtually and have quarterly in-person workshops. This is a picture. These are just some pictures of some of the work that teachers have done. And I think it's really powerful and speaks to how much they care and how much they have to overcome. This is one of the teachers' empty bookshelves after her classroom library was taken away. And she shared that stories are our survival guides. We find our safety in shared vulnerability, and stories lead us there. How do I teach stories? How do I teach survival now that they've taken my books away? And her life as a Floridian is important to her. So teachers have a lot to share and work through. And then finally, in a project that's collaborative with the Tampa Housing Authority, as well as the Friends of the Tampa Bay National Wildlife Refuges, and not formally with U.S. Fish and Wildlife, but with their blessing and excitement, we've started a placemaking and eco-justice literacies for Tampa Bay project, where we do place-based exploring, regular after-school literacy activities, like mapping, photography, and field notes, and then the kids get to share their learning with those around them. And this, I feel like, looks a lot more like what science educators do. We're just adding more books and more writing and more story-based sense making. So we've been reading books like Finding Wild and a River and my map book and How to Be an Explorer of the World as we go to our national wildlife refuges and our rivers to make sense of things. And what I have learned from this is the importance of slow placemaking with children so that they can ask questions and let those questions guide, where we go next, which I'm sure is familiar to all of you. So again, this is what's guiding me right now. It's guiding each of these projects in different ways. And, from my perspective, I think it's trying to solve some of these bigger problems in pieces. And I have a great collaborative group of colleagues that I work with, but I'm thrilled to be here because I wonder about the connective tissue that you already are thinking about with existing research resources and work in other disciplines. I'm thinking about if there are other ways that I haven't considered about how denial might manifest in schools and communities that need to be considered in the projects that I'm doing or that you can see are connected to this work. And I talked a little bit about this. My perspective is teachers need to do the work in order to overcome the existing barriers, but what are other ways that you know and have seen in your work? And I guess for my perspective, most importantly, I would like to stitch together something that has impact beyond, the research papers I have to write, and can make some headway in my state, as well as more broadly. So those are just the things that I'm thinking about with all these projects, and happy to talk more about anything. Obviously, there's so much left off the table and off the slides in a talk like this. And I can come back to this and just want to shout out, we have calls for submissions. If any of this sounds interesting to you, climate literacy and education. I'll be guest editing a special issue on water as conflict and water as commons. And it takes all disciplines. We are not just literacy or ELA focused. So if you want access to that, I can share it. And then more specifically in English education, there's a climate crisis and environmental special issue that some of my frequent collaborators are guest editing. So that, let's see, where did my little thing go? There it is. Okay, go back here.
Yeah, I want to say about the first one, I think that it is, this is a conversation that we often have at NCSE about how a lot of our units would actually work really well for other
Agreed.
disciplines. We have one of the story shorts that is already published. I'll put a link in the chat, is about the Sustainable Development Goals. And the amount of science that is actually in that particular lesson set is little, because it is just about, it's a solutions oriented unit about what can actually be done. What are the impacts we're going to see and what can actually be done about it, and what kinds of changes actually have the power to do something. It would be, it could be done anywhere. There's literacy that's a part of it. There is social studies that's a part of it. There's not a lot of math, but there is a little bit of math. So there are ways that it could be taken into one of these other disciplines, and it would work really well. So this idea of the connecting tissue, yes, how can we get that to these other classrooms, especially in places like Florida, where climate change is such a hot button word, but sustainable development goals are probably not so much. So yes, I agree. This is something that we are also wondering about. How can we either find that connective tissue or make that connective tissue?
Yeah, Carrie, as you say that, it makes me think about how the teachers I work with who have managed to bring climate and and socio-environmental topics into their classrooms, it's almost always solutions based. They do, like, let's research the topic, let's, write a letter to the, the senator, and, that happens not as often maybe as we would like, but it does happen. And I always see that as so connected, and I would love to see that lesson. So thank you for sharing. And yeah.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Scott, go ahead. I won't interrupt.
Oh, thanks. I actually have a couple of questions, but I'll start with one. One of them, thank you very much. This is great. I love this presentation, especially since I'm in Florida. So thank you for all the work. Kind of connect to that question. When you came to Florida, you had been working on this, or I'm just curious at the top end if you ran into any issues with the administrator. Maybe that's why they hired you. I'm not sure.
I don't
But
know,
maybe,
Scott. We should ask them.
yeah.
They won't hire me. Yeah, I've already been doing this. So I was hired in 2019, and half my veto was publications on climate change and climate justice at
So
that
they knew
point.
they knew what they were getting into
Yeah, they
then.
knew what they were getting.
Okay.
Mhm.
I mean, that part of that question comes because actually I was up at a climate conference a couple weeks ago in Orlando, and I had a conversation with someone who's in one of our colleges, Valencia College, who said there's real fear among the staff about even mentioning the word climate change. And so I can, for teachers, I think you're right. I mean, in the state of Florida, people are very nervous about these kinds of things, and you have to overcome that. And I'm curious, when you introduce your framework to these teachers, do they have these kinds of initial fears about things, and how do you overcome that? And clearly you shared some success stories with us, but I'm kind of wondering if you get any negative feedback from their administrators on doing this.
Yeah, so as a teacher, I was the person that didn't ask for permission and was going to ask for an apology, like apologize afterwards. And most of the teachers that I've worked with so far that are coming from communities of teachers that, the teachers who I've worked with so far are the kinds of teachers who are seeking out additional communities to support themselves. So I guess it's a specific kind of teacher to start with that I've had the most contact with. And the fall 2022 workshop that we had, the first one was in September, which was before Ian. And at that workshop, we had lots planned and a lot shifted for them to sort of have some catharsis around the state of their profession. And I think that was actually really essential to them being able to move forward and to articulate what they wanted to be able to do related to the climate and environmental topics. And so for me, that's taught me that these are not separate issues. It's why I position it as part of denial, and helping teachers see that we see that and that they need to think about it together and that it's all connected because they know that already, I think is really one clear step. One of the teachers who left that workshop went on to try to introduce a creative writing, like a environmental creative writing class as an elective at her school, and the administration was really supportive of her if she had students sign up, and then students didn't sign up, and she teaches at a pretty affluent area in Florida. And so I don't know that those kids are thinking about this or that they think it's the most important thing. So sometimes the challenges have come from other places than I would have expected, and the teachers I hear from who have integrated things and feel good about what they're doing have been real sneaky and careful, and then slowly built out through some tried and true practices, like an inquiry project where students are leading the way, right? So those are the things that I share with teachers and talk to them about. But it's not always smooth sailing for many reasons. And ELA classrooms, I guess I'll just say as well, ELA classrooms are the most subject to scrutiny in terms of the curriculum. Yeah, by far and away. There's more scripted curriculum. It's tested more than anyone else except for math, but even math isn't tested as much these days. If you hear about the reading wars that are happening, those eat teachers' time and change the way curriculum is handed out. And then with the most recent changes to our state standards, even the books that teachers can choose are selected. So they can't, slip in a Cli-Fi book that might be of interest, they have to say, okay, maybe I can teach Grapes of Wrath this year, and we can talk about the Dust Bowl as part of, you know, a environmental topic. So they're like constantly looking for these wiggle room places rather than being able to connect them to the standards. Like in New Jersey, for example, I'm sure you're all aware, you know, the entire standards have been aligned with climate topics and climate issues, and climate change is an issue. So, so yeah, so it's sneaky. I think I answered your question, but maybe I missed something.
You know, and I totally, yeah, I get where you're coming from. I definitely have that. I will say that a lot of the teachers that reach out to us are working in like private schools, charter schools, university affiliated schools. I don't know if USF has one, where like a lot of pre-service teachers, you know, do their student teaching and such. But what I found is that, you know, we call our program Climate Across the Curriculum. So we're really emphasizing that, yeah, everyone should be teaching climate in their classes. And when we actually talk to ELA or social studies teachers about what we're doing and how the connections can be made, a lot of them are very receptive to that. And you know, I do an activity where basically I say, what is your pacing calendar looking like? What is your curriculum? Here's where you can sneak climate in because, again, Florida. But one of the biggest barriers that I find is just that teachers who are not necessarily, you know, aren't science or general topics teachers, like, you know, lower elementary where they teach all the subjects, will see the word, you know, climate or environment and instantly go, oh, okay, that's not a PD that's aimed at me. So
Yeah.
when I'm able to draw them into conversation and talk about, you know, projects we've done, and again, bringing in literature and Cli-Fi and persuasive writing and civic engagement, we often get very positive responses. The struggle that I find is getting them to look past the word climate or environment, because like I said, they see it and instantly just like, oh, okay, you know, not for me.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. A couple of the teachers that came to the workshop came because they were affiliated with the Tampa Bay Area Writers Project or the university in some way, and knew, you know, one of the folks that was helping me facilitate. And so, and they came and they're like, I don't really know what these words mean, but I'm here to find out, you know, and that takes a particular kind of person. And so, yeah, I think that, I guess I have thought about it as I'm starting with the people that are going to make things happen and build the most momentum, and then continue to grow the networks. And as you guys do, as all of you do, and you all know that better than I do probably, but continue to do that through this particular strain of the community of teachers. So yeah, I that resonates for me.
Alexandra, just adding my thanks to your bringing things up. Perhaps there's also speaking about outside of school or beyond school programs and work on that. Now, I'm among those in the network that work in the areas where we're not dealing primarily with the denial or the political, we don't want to teach it and things like that. So I'm more from California and DC, where you're not getting a strong political, you shouldn't teach it. But there's still, it comes out in a different way. And what I'm getting at is our experience, and maybe the things, maybe what we also want to do is encourage those in Florida and in the tough states. Please feel free to contact or connect with those of us in the other states, because there is kind of a sense of a community and a sense of, you know, the people in Florida, like, yeah, if you want to deny science and engineering, what's that going to do for your economy? What's that going to do for your kids, right? I mean, you're not teaching science, right? But I think in California and DC, we still have a problem with education in schools is not very good. We don't teach science well. We don't teach it hands-on. We don't do it well. And it is other programs outside the school that are deliberately have been making up the filling the vacuum. And so our organization brings the two together. So behind me, you might recognize the logo of the banner of the Girl Scouts. The Girl Scouts is a program where, okay, we're going to teach it, and our students are in this troop, and this is what our troop teaches. Deal with it, right? I mean, in terms of, that's not for the Board of Education to deal with. Other troops might not do it, science festivals, things like that. Anyway, is there anything about of connecting, whether it's outside the state or within the state, of programs that are just like, this is not publicly funded. This is our own outside Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts program. Deal with, we're going to do it. So
yeah, no, I think that's I guess on two fronts, that's where I'm I mean, I'm at a publicly funded institution and I'm doing it anyway. So so on the one hand, agreed. And then that's one of the reasons that I started working with the Tampa Housing Authority. Was I realized that it'd been so long since I was working with children and, actively at an institution or at a place that wants to bring all of the education to the kids that they can possibly get for all of the right reasons. But there are a ton of organizations in Florida that are working on our many environmental issues. They are out there, they're doing stuff, it's happening. And kids here, maybe separate from what I said about the one teacher that I work with, I guess I should say more affluent children and rural children here are very connected to the environment. And those ways are complex, because more affluent children are more likely to be boaters or, folks with homes on the water, and rural children are affiliated with the tourism industries and agriculture industries and things like that. And so, we have big, huge 4-H clubs and big ag communities and things like that that are doing good stuff, that it's not just what you would maybe assume about Florida. I think it comes down to for me, that I will use those outside of school spaces as often as I can. However, the K-12 public system, even with all the attacks on it, is still who gets access to the most kids and where all of our children can be served. And so I feel like to me, ultimately, it's an issue of justice that we get this topic and these issues into every classroom, in every discipline, at every grade level, because the kids need it. So yeah, I hear you, James, and thank you for the invite to reach out to those of you who have slightly less uphill battle, challenge to take.
So this is the end of the hour. I totally understand if folks, including you, Alex, if you need to head out. I feel really bad that we got started late. I am really sorry about my tech problems. I will say that I'm happy to stay on for a few extra minutes if folks want to continue the conversation. Again, totally get if you need to hop off. I don't know, Alex, are you on a tight timeline? Do you need to head out?
I'm not on a tight timeline, but I will take extra minutes when I have them. And so if people are ready to go, I understand, but would love to chat more, obviously, if that's what I keep chatting.
I would love to chat a little bit more.
Okay, yeah, let's chat more, Leah. That sounds good.
Just really quickly. So one of the things, like, we have been traditionally a little more, I'm a science person, so I'm traditionally a little bit more on that science level. But our resources are definitely trying to cross that barrier. And I love what you're doing with, like, the libraries. And I wish that every library would have something similar. So I don't know if that's a model that you could, I don't know. Like, I don't know if that's a model that could scale, but just imagine, like, if that was a resource that teachers could go to and find a book and then see kind of the ways that those apply. One of the things I was going to ask you about, we're 13 to 23, our age group, so we're a little bit older, but one of the things that we are actually looking at is we have something called the three lenses where students write case studies based on the three lenses. So cultural, sociocultural, economic, and environmental lens. So they look at a topic through all three, trying to get them to look at this through a social justice way without saying social justice, because
saying it. Yes, love that.
because now that is apparently not allowed to be said.
Yeah.
So, heaven forbid. And so I'm curious if you think that possibly, like, we do that and then we have them write case studies, but I'm wondering if on some level it might be interesting to see if there's like having a book or two different articles that they could do that with, if that would be almost like a better way of doing it rather than writing a case study.
I love that. I don't think that they would have to be separate. I'm not sure exactly what a case study means for your work, like what the output of that is. But, from my perspective, adding text to a project to help someone understand something, or use a text set to help situate some of these ideas or whatever it is you're looking at, to me would be really beneficial. And it doesn't just have to be a fiction book or even a research article. It could be a documentary or a TED Talk or a social media post.
Right.
Like all of those things can help illuminate any one of those areas from my perspective. And it could become about also how to communicate about, I guess, the topic, like, and how to talk about it. And, like the other area there could be the rhetoric or the communication about it. Like, how is this communicated? Like, I could see if I was sitting in a project, like a meeting on that, I'd be like, well, what if a fourth lens was rhetoric or communication? Like, how does all of this then come together through what's said about it? And that could be where you could read something, I guess. But that's just, off the top of my head. I wanted to know a lot more and hear from you how you think I could scale this, because I'm so overwhelmed by it. I'm like, this is really good. I really like my website that we made, but I don't know what to do with it now.
I was sitting there looking at it and I was like, oh my gosh, if I could point teachers to that. So I would love to connect with you offline, because it would be something even, I get that it's a little bit more Florida reference, but I do love the way that you've attached place to, it's really nice. And,
Thanks.
as we're sort of like figuring out how to be more appealing, because Carolyn, I think you said, the minute you say something about science, all the English teachers go, yeah, that's not me. And I'm like, yes, it is. You don't have to be an expert. You don't have to be the expert. You can, none of us are the experts.
Do you have any idea how many like science and engineering types cannot write to save their lives?
Yes, because I'm married to an engineer. Yeah, and that's part of our problem, I think, is the communications piece. It's part of what's been.
I took science and technical communication, and it was like 100% for like engineers, and I'm like, I didn't learn anything about peer review.
Yeah. Well, and also like, I think environmental educators do a pretty good job of like the empathy lens of things, but that's just, and most kids aren't going to get an environmental ed class in their like K-12 experience, like maybe as an elective, like, but it might be like smattered in. But that's the other thing that I know a lot of my colleagues in literacy, like they gravitate towards like, oh, well, we can foster empathy with the environment, and like, who are we in the more than human world, and all of that kind of thing. And I'm like, yes, that's really good. And we can contribute that, but we can also contribute more than just
just
that.
The empathy.
Yeah. Because I always worry about the pigeonholing, like, oh, well, literacy teachers can do this part or this part. And I think what I'm hearing from all of you too is that like, no, we can all do all of the parts, but there are strengths and like assets to, the particular disciplines. And if we think about it that way, rather than like, let's just fit together, I think that's good. I remember I was in a job talk one time, and I used the word transdisciplinary, and one of the people in the job talk was like, well, can we like semantic this trans versus interdisciplinary and why one versus the other? And he got like really bent out of shape about it. And I finally said basically what I just said there, and was like, what's the goal? Like, you know, like, do you want kids to be able to fluidly move between disciplines so that we can solve the actual problems, or do you want to just claim the discipline? Like, what's more important? And from my perspective, like, the kids don't know about the disciplines. Why are we making them worry so much about that instead of solving the problems and working solutions and communicating those and creating a society we want to live in? But, you know,
I had
it's idealistic of me.
I had a whole email thread going back and forth about using the term citizen science versus community science.
Mm.
And I'm like, Jesus Christ. It has nothing to do with the US migrant, like it's not about your legal status in the, like, you can be a citizen of literally, and you can be a citizen of Guatemala in the United States, and you're doing it, like, that's not what citizen means in this context. Jesus Christ.
I know it does get hard.
Yeah,
and if you
the
look
semantic arguments, I feel like there are times for them, but we're in a crisis, so maybe let's focus on.
And also, if you Google citizen science, you get actual citizen science resources. If you Google community science, you get articles talking about how the term citizen science is problematic and we should use community science instead. So, if we actually want teachers to do student-led projects, how about we point them?
I didn't know that was a battle. That's very interesting. It doesn't surprise me, but I didn't know.
I get it. Like, I think it's been led by like a lot of indigenous groups who have very complicated relationships with the word citizen.
Yeah.
But I'm just like, overall, you can be a citizen of Potawatomi Nation. Like, you know, like, it's citizen of the world, Earth citizen.
Yeah.
It's not. Good Lord, it's not that deep. It's just catchy.
Maybe they just need to call it world citizen science, and then it's all
global citizen science.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, just whatever makes them happy, so that I can actually take the kids out and go do some water sampling. I don't know.
We just go test the water. Leah, I put my email in the chat as well. So
Oh, great. Yeah, I would love to catch up and just learn more. But yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that's a really valuable resource. And we have something called Learning Labs, and we pretty much point people to other resources. Like, we're one resource, but we also know we're one of quite a few really, really great resources. And we tend to point out to other people and other resources. So I'd love to talk to you a little more about that.
Yeah, that sounds great. Let's chat. That sounds good. Thank you, Carolyn, for
before we head out, it's the sort of the more theoretical papers wouldn't really be as much of a fit, but if you have any specific lesson plans that, you know, you or the teachers or institutions create around this concept, you know, we have these calls and it's for the Clean Network, but the Clean Network is also a repository of lesson plans from basically pre-K through, I would say, undergrad, basically all about climate. And you know, we've been working hard to have more elementary resources, more like indigenous-led resources. But yeah, stuff that's focusing on like humanities. I don't think we have as much of that. So I can send you the link on the website to submit resources, and it has to be like, you know, off the shelf, like ready to use in a classroom rather than, again, like an explanatory paper. But yeah, if you or any of your...
I don't write, I haven't written those, but I have grad students that have, and some of the teachers maybe would be able to contribute.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
I just haven't in a while. Not that I'm not doing it. I just haven't written it up that way. So
yeah, no worries. I wasn't sure, but just I would love to get more stuff along these lines into the broader like Clean Network
yeah, that's great.
Like repository. I think that'd be good to have.
Yeah, that's great. I know people that have done that and have good stuff and are much better at it than I am, so I will connect them. So
you always know where to find me.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks so much. See you soon,
Karen.
It was so nice
Thank you. Bye.